Week 12 of the 2022 college football season is wrapped up, and today, as we begin to look forward to Week 13, the final week of the regular season, I'll be giving you guys my updated college football rankings. Week 12 turned out to be unexpectedly the most wild week of the regular season to this point. Honestly, it didn't look like there were going to be too many good games in Week 12. There were a couple of ranked matchups in the Pac-12 that we knew were going to be huge, but otherwise, this was a week that heading in, it looked like it was going to be a pretty inactive week, but we were definitely wrong about that. Week 12 turned out to be a wild week of action, and obviously the pressure is on for the teams towards the top of the rankings or college football playoff contenders, and we saw that yesterday as all the teams start to look forward to the postseason that is rapidly approaching. We saw several close games that weren't expected to be, and in the end, it made for a great week of action. But I'll be giving you guys my updated rankings here today. These are for Week 13. So that said, let's look at 1 through 7. We got Georgia number 1 this week once again. This team beat Kentucky 16-6. And that was actually a pretty close game, even though I don't really think there was a time where we thought Kentucky would beat Georgia. Georgia was in control for the majority of that game, despite it being such a low-scoring one. But Georgia's 11-0 on the season, and quite honestly, that theme of college football playoff contenders having close games to opponents they probably should have beaten by way more. That was a pretty common theme of Week 12. Ohio State beat Maryland 43-30. That game was extremely close. Maryland they just hung in there that entire game, and honestly, there were a couple points in that game where I thought maybe Maryland pulls off a massive upset over Ohio State here. The Terps really hung in there, and Ohio State got a last-second touchdown that makes the score look a little bit better, but this game was basically a 36-30 win for Ohio State. It was extremely close, and they are lucky to get out of there with a win, which sounds crazy because Maryland is not they're a decent football team, but they're not very good. And so that was kind of unexpected to see it be that close. But Ohio State 11-0. Michigan beat Illinois 19-17 off of a last-second field goal. They were that close to losing to the Illini. And Illinois is a team that we've known they've been a good team this season. They've hung around in the Big Ten West, even though they've lost 4 games recently. But that's still a win over a decent Illinois team, even though it wasn't maybe the cleanest one. But you can definitely tell. Ohio State and Michigan were both looking forward to what is the massive matchup coming up here in Week 13, and that's Ohio State and Michigan in the Horseshoe. So that's going to be obviously the game of the year for both these teams. Both teams are 11-0. It's a massive rivalry. What more could you expect in a college football game? That's for sure. So that's going to be something exciting to look forward to. TCU's number 4. They beat Baylor 29-28. And if you've watched my rankings in the previous few weeks, I have underestimated TCU a bit. I do feel like this is a team that has really caught a lot of breaks. They had to get a last-second field goal against Baylor, and they were rushing the clock. That clock almost ran out, but TCU was able to pull off a very clutch field goal at the very end there. But in the end, TCU is 11-0, and obviously you're doing something right if you're 11-0. So and we'll see how TCU does in the next couple of games. They obviously got the Big 12 championship and next week, so we'll see how TCU finishes out. At this point, if they finish out the season 13-0, win the Big 12, TCU is going to be in the college football playoff. That's definitely given at this point. Even though I feel like TCU, they're a really talented team. They're playing very well. They find ways to win, but they just haven't been very dominant this season. And we really aren't convinced that TCU is a team that, say, could hang around with Georgia, Ohio State, or Michigan. And you could even say that about LSU or USC or even Alabama. But at this point in the season, with them being 11-0, you got to rank them in the top 4. LSU's number 5. They beat UAB 41-10. They sure had a cupcake matchup in Week 12. That's for sure, as they beat them 41-10. They're 9-2 on the season, moving up 1 position after that win. And LSU, obviously, I got to put in front of Alabama, considering the Tigers did beat Alabama. But the Crimson Tide hang around at number 7 this week after beating Austin Peay 34-0. And they're 9-2 on the season. And LSU needs some chaos to happen, and this definitely was a week that the Tigers were watching. If you have Ohio State and Michigan both lose their games, or even one of them, and say if TCU lost to Baylor, that puts LSU in a really good position to potentially sneak in to the top 4. So LSU just wants chaos right now if you want a chance at that top 4. And USC is kind of on the outside looking in as well. They just beat UCLA 48-45, moving up 3 positions after that win. They're 10-1 on the season, and I considered putting USC ahead of LSU, but at this point in the season, I do think the Tigers are playing better than the Trojans. USC has just been too inconsistent defensively, and that's something that I think could come back to bite in the end, especially if USC, say they sneak into the college football playoff, they take on an outstanding offense like Ohio State. I mean, it's going to be tough for USC to hang in there. And Alabama, once again, is number 7 this week. Moving on to 8 through 14, we got Penn State at number 8. This team is quietly a top 10 team, no doubt. They beat Rutgers 55-10, a solid win for the Nittany Lions, and they are 9-2 on the season. And they're quietly, I mean, obviously you got Ohio State and Michigan, who are the big headliners out of the Big Ten, but Penn State is not a bad team, and they've been playing pretty well recently, so keep an eye on them. Tennessee's number 9. They got stunned by South Carolina, 38-63. I mean, that's a breaker. That's just so difficult for Tennessee, being a team that, I mean, you went out, you beat South Carolina, you beat Vanderbilt, you're in the college football playoff. And for Tennessee to lose to a South Carolina team that has been very poor offensively all season, this team has been terrible in offense all season. And Tennessee allows 63 points to South Carolina. I mean, that's a stunner. Honestly, one of the most, probably the biggest upset of the college football season to this point. You could definitely argue that. So, I mean, yeah, that's a brutal loss for Tennessee. They're now out of college football playoff contention at 9-2 on the season. That's, once again, just a brutal loss for Tennessee. Washington's number 10. They beat Colorado 54-7. This team they started out the season pretty strong. They were ranked in the top 15, I think, back in late September. They lost a couple of games and kind of fell out of the picture, but, I mean, suddenly Washington is right back in the top 10 for me. They beat Colorado 54-7. They're 9-2 on the season. And I mean, it's all season long in the Pac-12. It's been USC, it's been UCLA, Utah, and Oregon. Those are your top 4. But Washington has cracked that top 4 now. And they're playing very well right now. They are a hot team in the Pac-12. So keep an eye on them. That's obviously the Pac-12, I don't fully know the picture, but I know USC has locked up a spot in the Pac-12 title game. Washington needs some chaos to happen if they want a chance. But yeah, we'll see what happens there. It looks like Oregon is probably the favorite. We'll probably end up seeing a USC-Oregon Pac-12 championship. But nonetheless, Washington's still number 10 ahead of Oregon because the Huskies did beat Oregon previously. Oregon beat Utah, though, this past week, 20-17. I considered putting them up into the top 10, but once again, I don't want to put Oregon ahead of Washington at this current point just because Washington did beat Oregon recently. But the Ducks are 9-2, definitely a very talented team that has taken a couple of disappointing losses. Obviously, their huge blowout loss to Georgia back in week 1 and the disappointing loss to Washington. Clemson's number 12, and I'm still maybe sleeping on Clemson a little bit. I don't think I am, but this is a team that just beat Miami 40-10. They're 10-1 on the season. The ACC is just not a good conference this year, and I mean, honestly, it's probably the worst. It's the worst conference out of the Power 5 this season. I'd say by a decent margin. And North Carolina, seeing them just lose to Georgia Tech this past week, that just destroys all confidence that I maybe had in the ACC. And Clemson at this point, they're ranked number 9 in the college football playoff rankings for week 12, and they've won now 2 straight. They beat Louisville and Miami in the past couple of games. But, I mean, this is still a team that lost to Notre Dame 35-14. That's probably the best team they've played this season to this point. And, I mean, for Clemson, I don't know that this team is as strong as some may think. And they play South Carolina next week and then North Carolina after that in the ACC title game. So, and that South Carolina game, that's going to be very interesting. South Carolina coming off of their massive upset over Tennessee. So Clemson at 10-1, I don't think that they're a team that should get into the college football playoff, had they won out, or if they went out, but we'll see what the committee thinks about that. Kansas State's number 13. They beat West Virginia 40-31, allowed 31 points to a poor West Virginia team, but they're 8-3 on the season, and my top-ranked 3-loss team this week. And, I mean, this is more so than in previous years. I've ranked a ton of 3-loss teams this week and even a couple of 4-loss teams. I don't really remember ranking a lot of 3-loss teams, especially at this point in the season, but here we are. This has been a wild season. But yeah, Kansas State's number 13, beating West Virginia, and they're in a good position moving forward. There's a good chance that we see Kansas State and TCU face off for the Big 12 title game, so Kansas State is something to look forward to there. Notre Dame's number 14. They beat Boston College 44-0. Notre Dame's really come around this season, and they've improved dramatically over the course of the year. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they finish up, and them also when they play in a bowl game this season. This is a very interesting team, that's for sure. Moving on to 15 through 21, we got Utah 15. They lost to Oregon 17-20. third loss of the season for Utah. This moves them down 7 positions for me. I've been very optimistic about Utah all season long, but after another loss, difficult loss like that, I do want to bump Utah down to number 15, even though I still think the Utes are a talented team. They've just, you could say they've disappointed a little bit this season. They've had a couple of brutal losses, and this is a team that heading into the season was a potential college football playoff dark horse, but at this point, obviously their chances are pretty much gone. Florida State's number 16. They beat Louisiana 49-17. This is also a team that's really come around. They're 8-3 on the season. Definitely a team to keep an eye on. Oregon State's number 17. They beat Arizona State 31-7. And once again, the Pac-12 is, they're a solid conference this season. They don't have a big standout. Maybe USC is that standout at this point in the season. But, if you look at the Big Ten, you got Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State. That's pretty much it for teams that are good. And the Big 12's probably only got 2 or 3 teams of that. ACC's maybe got 1 or 2. The Pac-12 has got 6 teams ranked right now. You got USC, Oregon, Washington, Utah, Oregon State, and UCLA. And obviously Washington State is not far behind. So, this is a solid conference, but the best way to describe the Pac-12 this season, it has eaten itself alive. That is for sure. You got 6 solid teams in this conference, but none of them are massive standouts at this point. USC is the one chance that the Pac-12 has of getting into the college football playoff, and USC needs some chaos to happen. So, there's several great teams in the Pac-12 this season. Just once again, no one really stands out. But Utah at this point, they've fallen off to 8-3. Their chances of winning a Pac-12 title this season are gone, but still, this is a solid team. And Oregon State, they're not far behind at this point in the season at 8-3. They're definitely a team that I think some are sleeping on. Tulane's number 18. They beat SMU 59-24, moving up 5 positions after that win at 9-2. They're probably, the group of 5 has got no great team this season, just to put it. You got Cincinnati, you got Tulane, and UCF just took a terrible loss. So, you got Tulane and Cincinnati, who are the 2 best group of 5 teams. I think Tulane is better than Cincinnati by a decent margin. Ole Miss is number 19. They lost to Arkansas 27-42, and that's a game that I think that's a stunner right there. They got just blown out by Arkansas, and Arkansas is a team that hasn't been terribly good this season. So Ole Miss, that's just a brutal loss. They're 8-3 on the season, and I'm moving them down 7 positions after that loss. And the Rebels at this point, that's just a game that you need to. Going on the road to Arkansas, a team that's a 5-loss team right now, that is a terrible loss there for the Rebels. North Carolina's number 20. They lost to Georgia Tech 17-21. North Carolina's a team that last week I had them ranked at number 11, and I felt like the Tar Heels potentially were the best team in the ACC over Clemson. I've thought that for the past couple of weeks, but then they lose to Georgia Tech. It's just, that's a stunning loss there for North Carolina. And definitely a game, you got it at home. You just can't lose that game. And so I'm moving them down 9 positions to number 20. They're a 9-2 on the season. South Carolina is my top-ranked 4-loss team. They beat Tennessee, obviously, 63-38. And I feel like you have to rank South Carolina after a massive win like that. We'll see how they do going up against Clemson next week. Clemson definitely is a team that shouldn't be sleeping on South Carolina right now. But Gamecocks, huge win, and especially, they're coming off of a 38-6 loss to Florida. And Florida just lost to Vanderbilt. And South Carolina beats Tennessee this week 63-38. College football is just, it's awesome. And this is why we love it so much, is because of just all the unexpected turns. And that was definitely a turn this past weekend, them beating Tennessee. Moving on to 22 through 25, we got UCLA at 22. They lost to USC 45-48. A disappointing loss for UCLA, even though they hung in there. And they're now 8-3 on the season, moving down 3 positions after that loss to 22. Texas is 23. They beat Kansas 55-14. Texas is also a solid 4-loss team. They've played a very difficult schedule, and Texas has taken multiple just brutal losses. This team is, they've obviously lost to Alabama, and they lost to Oklahoma State by a touchdown, lost to TCU by a touchdown, and they also lost to Texas Tech, which was kind of the outlier of those losses. But Texas is still a solid team. They went to Kansas, beat them 55-14, got revenge off of last year's loss to them. And at 7-4, I got them at 23. Cincinnati 24, they beat Temple 23-3. I honestly, as a 2-loss Cincinnati team, this is just not a very good team. But at this point, with the amount of 4-loss teams that we have at this current point, I got to rank Cincinnati at 24. And Coastal Carolina is 25. They were supposed to play Virginia this weekend, that game unfortunately got canceled. And so for Coastal Carolina at 9-1, I do have them ranked at 25 as probably one of the best group of 5 teams right now. First 5 out, we got Iowa at 26 and Purdue at 27. Your 2 leaders of the Big Ten West. UCF is 28, Boise State is 29, and UTSA is 30. And dropped out this past week. UCF is 18, or was 18. They dropped out. Duke was 21. I did have Duke ranked. They were playing pretty solid heading into week 12. They ended up losing to Pitt. And Illinois lost to Michigan, even though they kept it close. And then Minnesota was 25. They lost to Iowa. So that said, that's going to wrap it up for my rankings here today. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on these rankings. And I appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.